This is Season 2, Episode 2 of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. Doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some strong opinions. Tonight's episode, motivating different play styles, or show me the money. Everyone, welcome again to Mastering the RPG. I'm your host, Carl, with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you can find information about the show at masteringtherepg.com. That's one word, and you can send us an email, feedback, questions, need help with something, whatever, at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. Those are both one word. And gentlemen, nice to hear you again on the mics. How are you doing?
Going great, thanks, Carl. It's going very well. Beautiful, beautiful summer's day down here in Australia. Doing well. Thinking all RPGs. I start playing with my school groups this afternoon. So, back into the full swing of RPGing full time, which is really, really exciting.
Yes, that's awesome. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the other end. I'm trying a couple of new systems, like I talked about last episode. Cyberpunk Red has been really interesting, and then I think there's a couple one-shots where we're going to switch up some indie RPGs. So when I played those, I'll report on what I think of them.
Ooh, I'm starting a new one next week. I start Spire for the first time. We're going to do a 5-shot. I'm actually playing in that campaign, so I can report back on how Spire operates as a game. It looks very cool.
Everybody gets to play other games. I don't. Though we did have an awesome moment in our Savage Worlds campaign where we love dramatic tasks, and we did a dramatic task, and there was just at the last second, roll the die or fail, and we had a critical failure. And
I had a critical failure.
Yeah, Eric had the critical failure. Yep.
I was very close to dying. I ended up in space alone. That wasn't good. It was everything happened bad at once, so that wasn't exciting.
Best part is they spent all this time trying to pick up some pieces of their spaceship, and they all basically got destroyed because of this critical failure. So anyway, that was fun. So we were enjoying that. Cool, awesome. Hey, I did want to throw out. Before we get too far into it, a cool stuff. We have cool stuff found. Do you copy? Cool stuff found. Over. At the time of recording, these folks at PEG, Pinnacle, the Savage Worlds folks, and I love Savage Worlds, they've got a Kickstarter going on right now for a martial arts setting called Legends of Ghost Mountain, and that's currently on Kickstarter now. Eric's backed it, so
yeah, I backed it. Yeah, it's a wushu setting, but there's definitely a twist on it where the martial arts are based on emotions basically instead of Shaolin animal styles. It looks like a really rich world. It kind of came out of nowhere, honestly, right, Carl?
I didn't expect it at all.
Yeah. I think they said that Shane, who's the creator of Savage Worlds, has kind of been germinating in his brain for a couple years, and now they're finally coming out with it. So it's definitely a genre that is underrepresented, I think, and so I'm pretty excited about it.
Excellent. Yeah, we just wanted to drop that out there because people. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. Go on. I was just going to say, and I have one more other Kickstarter that I'm also very interested in that I think I'm going to back. And it's been really hot, too, on Kickstarter. It's called the Oracle Character Generator, and it's this really in-depth... It's all a bunch of cards, and you can pull a bunch of them, and it enables you to generate a lot of NPCs, or generate even, a backstory if you're a player. So it looks really deep, and there's a lot of variety, and, it's picking up a lot of steam. So I'm definitely going to be backing this as well.
Very cool.
And again, when we get it, we'll do a full cool stuff on it, for sure.
Very, very cool. So a couple of great Kickstarters we just wanted to get out there for everybody to know about. Now, another great thing today, we had some mail. We got some email. Very exciting. Email. So this email is about episode 11 when we went about character backgrounds. And Gary sends us a note to us, and I'll read it out for everybody, and then maybe we'll comment a little bit on it. He mentions, I find it interesting that a lot of people like to start with the brooding hero and the bad boy type of character. Not all adventurers need to be orphans, as we said in the title. He continues, lately I've been enjoying playing the young, naive farm boy that is forced to grow up because of whatever reasons they have gone into the world to make their own fortune. I also like the idea of having a decent child, but just getting wanderlust. You don't have to have a huge dramatic backstory. In fact, it would probably make the story arc of the PC much more dramatic going forward without, I guess. I think for sure that's part of the reason we titled it, Not All Adventures Need to Be Orphans. They can have a good life.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think of that?
Well, the one thing I would say to that, and this is something that's just totally not even in the sphere of game playing, but like something that I've come to realize over the years and dealing with my own stuff in my own childhood, is that like, it's always important to have perspective, but like everybody has trauma or tragedy, and everybody's tragedy is valid. But like some people's tragedy is very, or whatever. Some people, everybody has their, maybe not just tragedy, but everybody has their like
challenges,
issues,
life
has
challenges.
Their challenges, yeah, exactly, and they're all valid, right? But other, some it's very light, and some it's very heavy, right? So I think in this case, while you can have this really good childhood, it's still important to have some type of either, flaw or something, or you could have just a strained relationship maybe with your sibling or something. There's always some hook there to make a character have more depth. But he's absolutely right. Like, I think that is definitely an underused trope in playing games. We've seen it in fiction a lot. I mean, there's a couple big book series that kind of like the farm boy, but then they often have like, they're like, say, the Dragon Reborn, right? And then there's that one moment where they attack the farm. But yeah, so I think that's a really good take. What do you think, James?
Oh, absolutely! It's a fantastic trope. I mean, this is the Bilbo Baggins trope, right? You grow up in a nice, secure little place where everything's in order and everything's in its place, and then the challenges that then emerge become part of the story. And rather than labouring yourself down with all these things that you've had to overcome before you actually start playing, having the game in front of you where the challenges of the game produce your story arc and produce your character development is amazing. It's really, really cool. And you're risking that status quo. So it's the quintessential hero's journey. One thing I did notice when Gary had sent this through, it reminded me of a quote. I read this quote. It came out of nowhere. I can't remember where I read it. I read it this week. It was on some Reddit or Patreon or some Twitter feed, but there was a great quote that it immediately reminded me of it. It said, "For a change, why not play a character who's interested in humour and fun? You'll be surprised how humorous and funny it is." And it just clicked with me. It's like, if you're going to play a brooding, dark character, then you're playing a brooding, dark game, aren't you? You're playing brooding and dark. So doing something a bit different, playing a naive farm boy, sounds like a great change up. I love it. I think it's really cool.
Well, you can play a brooding dark hero who's funny too. That's always a fun challenge to mix it up that way. The one thing I also would say about that, and you brought up the Bilbo Baggins, which I think is an interesting example, is that because he also had that wanderlust, but it was like his wanderlust that made him almost like not really an outcast, but there was conflict there with like the rest of the people because they were so content staying still. So even like, while he has like, you have a good childhood, that desire to go adventuring can also just be the cause of friction that you had in your early life, right? Because everybody else wanted to just stay at the farm or whatever. So like I said, even though you might have a good childhood, there still was that friction, or you were still a little bit of an outsider because of your desire to be adventurer, which we talked about is like, adventurers are kind of freaks, right? They're like, they're weirdos. They go after
really
these
are.
Crazy things. Yeah. They don't join the normal thing. So yeah, that's a good take. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Gary, so much for sending us a note. That was some excellent insight, I think. And again, anybody else want to send us a note, send us some feedback, it's gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. So thank you much. Or you can drop us something on our Twitter feed. Oh, go ahead, James.
And Gary, keep us updated. Let us know how you at the point in time where your happy-go-lucky wanderlust farm boy becomes dark and brooding. We'd like to know the moment that actually occurred.
When both his parents are killed, and I am Batman now.
Yeah.
All right.
That's right.
All right. Well, great. Thank you again. So we're going to get right into the main topic.
Mastering the RPG with Connor, Eric, and James. Yeah.
All right. tonight our main topic's all about motivating players with different play styles. Not necessarily motivating a player character, but the players themselves. But we can touch on that as well a little bit. So getting folks excited about the game, motivated, excited to participate. It's a challenge. So I'll jump in right with James. James, what do you think one of the biggest challenges, or what do you think the kind of challenges are? I obviously have my own take on that for sure. So what are your thoughts kind of?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, isn't it? And it becomes more and more acute the longer that your games go for, is something that I found. So that, once you're hitting that 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, year-long campaign, the motivating players as opposed to motivating the characters within the story becomes more and more something that you need to consider. And the challenges for me are the fact that no two player are the same. What may work for one player might not work for another. There are different reasons why people come and enjoy these games, and as a storyteller and games master, trying to make sure that the players are getting what they want out of the game is really one of the main things that we do, right? We're creating an entertaining focal point with hopefully an engaging story, but ultimately we're entertaining players, and we're hoping that they're motivated enough and enjoying the game enough that they, return and then they engage with the story. So in my mind, this is a core part of what we do. It's a core part of running a game. It's motivating the players to want to continue and to want to engage with the story.
And I think it's interesting in the business world, motivation theory is huge, right? How to motivate your employees. And that's why I think about the challenge, and it goes back to, like you said, there's so many different play styles. I literally off the top of my head can think about, the explorer, thinker, people who are motivated by problem solving, the narrator, actor, who are all about storytelling and role playing. There's the murderer hobo who loves combat, conflict, and that's what they want in a game. Monty Hall, people who are looking for prizes, treasure. People call them the accumulator as well, people who want to collect things. And then I call them munchkins or the power gamer. Not to mean to insult anybody who's power gamer, but they love optimization and they love making the game, they like beating the system. All those can be something that people want out of the game. And 3 months in, like you said, James, if they're not getting that part, they're not getting some storytelling time, they're going to start disengaging with what you're trying to accomplish. So there's many models. I mean, I literally off the top of my head, I could think of 5 of them, different player styles that you have to figure out how to keep each one engaged. Eric, you got any thoughts on that?
Not too much from what you already guys said. I mean, it definitely, on James's point, like as as the months roll on, it's a problem because you've maybe done a lot of those things that are, especially the easier things to tap on with players and with their whole deal. You've kind of already explored those, and especially with backstory hooks, right? And we talk about this so much, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more here, but you might have already explored their big backstory hooks, right? So, and we're not really totally talking about treasure here, although certain items maybe, like they've already acquired a lot of those. So it's just kind of, I think the biggest challenge is just discovering new ways that go beyond just the obvious hooks that they have, or the obvious, like, the fighter wants a +3 flaming sword, right? That's an easy kind of carrot. And once they get that, it's like, well, where do they go from there? How do you from a new type of thing that's maybe not so obvious? So that's definitely the challenge.
For sure. James, I thought you were about to jump in there. Any other thoughts that you had?
I think there is a whole episode to be had on what are the different types of players that you encounter within a game and what motivates them. I guess one extra point I was going to make is, and yes, some of these labels about the different types of player, the explorer or the actor or the slayer, the accumulator or power gamer, are easy to use, but it's also the challenge is people aren't as simple as that. That people are a combination of these factors, and they are looking at more than one way of things to get out of the game. And one thing that I've found, that depending on what you're giving them in part of the game, often players are interested in the thing that they're not getting. I know that sounds a bit funny, but you might run 3 or 4 sessions heavily on the role play, and then the next thing you know, your players are chomping at the bit and saying, we want more combat. It might just be that. So that some things you have to think about in motivation is exactly what Eric has said, which is what has been presented in the past, and what do you need to change up in order to keep it fresh for them in the future.
Isn't that kind of like variety is the spice of life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I think I think that's the challenge presented. I mean, obviously, as this goes on, it gets tougher. As it goes on, we're trying to match what people are looking for. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do, and not just as a game master, but as a player. Because as you know, on this podcast, we like to give players some advice as well. So we'll definitely want to get into that. But let's start off with the game master side of things. What, understanding those challenges, what are some of the things you think help with that? I don't know, Eric, do you want to jump in right away, or?
Sure, I can give one of the tips. I mean, like I said, the obvious thing here, I mean, besides treasure, right, is backstory hooks, and we've talked about this. I don't know how many times we've talked about this, but we constantly go back to it, and it's obvious. That's obviously one way. I think one of the things that might get overlooked, and it really depends on the system, because some systems are more combat focused. Almost all of the abilities are combat focused that you kind of get from it, or that's a more narrative system, whatever. But regardless of that, one of the things that I think that helps hook players, motivates players, entices them, is when you kind of look at their sheet and you see what maybe small kind of ribbon abilities they've taken, or you look at their backstory and you kind of grab something from that's not actually one of like the hooks that's obvious, but maybe like, so you present a situation where maybe their knowledge of, they just in their backstory said they had happened to walk through a city, and then maybe like that becomes, you kind of have a hook there where there's somebody from that city, and only because of their knowledge they might get a special reward, or they're going to really have to leverage that knowledge to get something. Or with a ribbon ability that's mechanical, I mean, something that doesn't come up that much, like D&D is kind of almost famous for these with some classes. They might have a kind of a silly ribbon ability that never comes up, or like backstory things, which they're getting rid of now for the new edition. Kind of seeing that and then really presenting an opportunity that will really utilize that. Like that's almost pivotal to the conflict, or to some type of reward or a quest. And so it really gets the player excited that, oh, here's a thing that I have that's never been used before, and now it really having that time to shine. So it's just looking for those kind of little things, either mechanically or narrative in their backstories, that might have gotten overlooked, and kind of really plugging them into something. And as a player, when that happens to me, it's like a big deal, right? And this could also be flavor. Like if you're flavored as your powers are flavored as being maybe like an ice mage or something, it kind of, well, maybe you never had as a GM, it was never in your cards to have something that might like really take advantage of that in like a combat. But then having that combat that really does, that they might be a little bit more powerful that one time. And that will really kind of get them excited that they were able to use their abilities. So those are some almost like rewards that you're giving to this person because they feel excited to be able to use these things.
And that rewards a certain type of player, though. The types of player that love their crafted backstory, that enjoy having their backstory come to life within the story, that enjoys that little flavoring of spells and flavoring of abilities. And I know, like I've run games for Eric, and he's right into that stuff. He loves all of those things where the reflavoring of abilities and the backstory emerging. Absolutely, that comes true. One thing that I've found over the time, though, is that eventually with a group, and if we're talking about a group of say 4 or 5 role players, eventually what comes to the fore are kind of the broader types of player types will start to lead and influence the group. And I find that after a while you will get almost a group consensus about what will motivate that group, which is a little bit of a different take rather than focusing on individual players by individual player.
So,
A good example, I had a fantastic group that ran through Curse of Strahd, for example. And if I had to look at the kind of archetypes of player type, these guys were optimizers in a major way. They love optimizing their story, but they loved acting. They were big storytellers. So they loved the mechanical aspects of the game, but they were big storytellers. And so for me, the accumulation of treasure, too many puzzles, all of those kind of things, they didn't really care. And so you were able to really focus. I was able to focus my energy on the things that really did make them tick. But how do you find that out? How do you know what makes a player tick? How do you first glean that information? I think that's one of the bigger challenges.
Well, for sure, and I think one of the things that we don't do nearly enough is we need to ask people what motivates them or what they understand there. But I did want to, before I got too far into that, James, I wanted to dig a little deeper into the point you were trying to make there. You said that the group kind of at some point gels towards a common play style or goal, and you mentioned this group. But did this group started off as, were there a lot of different individuals looking for different things, and then at some point they all kind of came together and said, you know what, we like the role playing, we like this, and we're focusing our whole adventure going, and obviously it's not like they're saying out loud, oh, we like the role playing necessarily, but you find them start doing that, and that's what they're doing, and they kind of forgot about the, coming into the game wanting to be accumulators or something like that. Is that
I think so.
You saw?
Yeah. I mean, when we first started, half the group didn't know each other, so 3 were friends and 2 were individuals, and so it took a while for that group to kind of gel. But what I found was puzzles and traps and mental conundrums were frustrating them quickly, and they would resort to dice rolls to solve them. They wouldn't actually try and work them out themselves. The acting element, they started to really love, and you could see that start to emerge with the use of accents and character attributes. And they would continuously talk amongst themselves about how to improve each other's character, how you could do things better, how they could fight better together, how they could work better as a team, optimizing their strengths. And once you start to see those things come back to you on the other side of the DM screen, you start to go, oh, okay, this is the stuff that they're really into. And then you can tailor the game towards that. So, yeah, they weren't all the same when they first started, for sure. They absolutely changed their play style as the game went on to kind of storm as a team, if you want to take that team building exercise terminology.
Storm and Norman.
That's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just obviously, I think here is that there's no one size fits all, right? I mean, you're going to have groups like James said. You're going to have groups where the people are just, while they might have some common things, they just have those different play styles. So I think it is having an open mind and being flexible necessarily based on the composition, and if you know them well, right? But to your point, as far as a party-based thing, another thing that at least I've seen in my own experiences in groups, what can happen later in the game to kind of get people excited about again, or to give them kind of a new breath of fresh air, is introducing some type of party, I don't even know what to call this, kind of like they now have an airship, right? They now have a base. This is a party reward, and I think we may have even talked about this before. I've definitely talked about this with Carl before a bunch, but kind of having a party character thing that they can all invest in, and that they can then put energy into, and then we want to acquire this thing for this, and it opens up new possibilities for them. That can be a really good thing to throw into a later campaign where maybe things have gotten a little stale, not for narratively, but mechanically or the way they've been playing, right? The challenges we were talking about. So that's another little thing that at least I, as a player, when that happens later in the game, it does get me more motivated, and I get more excited again, because here's this new thing that we can all work towards or invest in, right? After we already have our magic items and everything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think also just keeping an watching. It's harder to do online to get that body language and see where people are, but I have a regular group that I play with now, and I kind of starting to get where they're coming from a little bit, and it seems like the same players have certain desires, and they'll disengage if they don't get these desires met. And if you can, as a game master, feel that energy, you can start saying, well, they're not enjoying the combat part. I know I have one player that still doesn't understand how to sometimes do combat. And I think it's because it's not exciting sometimes, right? So it's much more interesting for them to role play out. So I have to constantly think about how I cycle these different interesting things based on the style, right? So, there's some puzzles, there's some combat. If we go a couple sessions without combat, some people are going to get itchy trigger fingers, and we need to think about that. Give that role play concept, because like Eric loves to role play with the other players, and having a chance for them to do that. And I got to work on that. Now they've got a spaceship and they're traveling, so there should be plenty of downtime to interact. I hope so. And so my big thing is give people kind of what they want, and if the party starts vectoring into something like Eric mentioned, they're all going after a spaceship or something, then that becomes kind of what you were saying, James. Now there's suddenly sort of a shared. What's the term I'm looking for? The party itself has a gaming style now that they're vectoring into, that you can now feel that energy, and it probably makes it a little easier because now you don't have to worry about too much to disparate ways people are thinking. Now you can focus on sort of this one thing in the long game as opposed to the short game. It's really kind of giving people each those individual desires met, whether it's rewards or whether it's just the being able to hang out with friends and talk to them in certain ways or whatever, right? So
and you will still have your outliers for sure. I mean, I think every group you could pick the person who is the person who adores the role play. You will pick the person who is desperate for the combat, and as long as you're giving equal measure to those as the game goes on, then generally you're keeping a finger on the pulse. I do love you mentioned just straight up asking them. I think that is a great short circuit. The lazy DM, Sly Flourish, one of the people that I kind of look to for advice every now and then, he has something that he calls stars and wishes, where he will ask a group periodically every 3 or 4 sessions what the star of the show has been so far, and then what they wish would happen more often, as a way to figure out the player motivations. So you can see, the star might be, we love when we get to role play downtime, or I really liked that combat, or this particular role play session, or this particular upbeat within the game. And the wish could be the thing that they yearn for the most. So yeah, asking your players. Who would have thunk it? Actually, communication. It bears out.
It's such a nice way of saying the old business term of doing a retrospective. Stars and wishes is so much better than what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we improve upon. And let's write it up in a report.
Importantly, he doesn't ask what didn't go well. He just says, "What did you love, and what do you wish you would have more of?" Rather than what am I terrible at, and what do you want to see gone. So it's the positives only retrospective. Which is great.
Love it. That Sly guy, he's got a lot of good ideas. All right. So, any other things from a GM perspective, and that you guys want to kind of chat about before we start talking about players and what motivates them, or how they can be part of the solution and not part of the problem?
I think you touched on a little bit in terms of the sessions and making sure you're keeping things fresh. But often when you're creating campaigns or you're creating adventures, it's actively, when you're writing your scenes and writing your session prep, to be actively mindful of the different player types and the different player motivations, and making sure that you are doing the best you can to provide the even spread of that stuff. I think that's important. But also don't forget, we're talking about players, not just characters. So giving time to talk, or time around the table to tease out some of this stuff. For example, the power gamers that I play with, love nothing more than talk about optimization. And so just spending or allowing 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of time each time you have a game session where you can just kind of shoot the breeze about optimization. And because when we're talking players, we're not necessarily just talking about the time that you're spending in game. We're talking about the time we're spending together in a lot of ways. So you can be fulfilling some of the players' motivations, kind of in the breaks between the game, in the little warm-up beforehand. You can be talking the interesting stuff that that they're interested in those times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, that's the key. I think that's where I was trying to go, and you said it very eloquently. Is how do you take all those elements for the different styles, kind of mix them together, that everybody gets a piece of what they're looking for, that motivates them to come to the table and play, hanging out with friends, shooting the breeze. We do that in our game. Sometimes we'll go a good 15 minutes before we start while people are just kind of catching up and everything. And there's a story template that focuses a little bit on that. And I talk about this all the time, the 5-room dungeon, and that whole concept is about each element of the dungeon is a little bit different. There's an entrance, which might be a trap. It might be a hazard. It might be something you have to figure out, somebody you need to talk to. Then there's a puzzle or a role-playing challenge. Then there's a trick, a combat opportunity. Then there's the climax where there's the big combat or whatever it is. So, and then there's rewards and revelation where people maybe discover new things and be able to use those science skills or those research skills or something to do something. And so the whole point of the and I won't go through it any more depth than that, but there's ways that people have come up with the adventure design that helps kind of bring all those elements together. As you're thinking about the scenes you're putting together, there are some structures out there that'll help you think through that. Not just the hero's journey, right? I mean, there's other structures.
Absolutely, and well-researched and well-documented things. The 5-room dungeon is a great example of how you mesh different play styles so that it's appealing to everyone. Absolutely, Carl. Yeah, good suggestion.
All right, excellent. So I think there's a lot a game master can do, but what about the players? Now we're talking about how we motivate players, but the players have a piece here. So what do the players bring to the table? From maybe motivating the game master or self-motivating themselves. So Eric, you are the player extraordinaire here. I'm just curious if you've got some thoughts to kick us off with.
Going back to, and I don't know if you guys were buying what I was selling before, but going back to like the kind of specific abilities or smaller backstory stuff that gets overlooked or seems niche things, which I always see personally as like, I get excited when those things become relevant in some way. And I think we've talked about this on the on Tabletop Tango before, Carl. I think when we were reviewing Savage Pathfinder, but there was like some niche abilities. And the thing as a player to do, besides actually talking to the game master, which of course is a valid thing to do, is like you said, James is saying these wishes and stars and wishes, right? The player has to write those things. Like really think about it. Like meet them halfway. I think that's like obviously the first thing to say. But besides that is sometimes you have to almost sort of create the situations yourself to utilize these kind of small abilities that might get overlooked. So this is almost not so much as like helping the game master, but you are. I mean, you could this is almost a subtle way to remind them, but you're also kind of creating your own reward here, where like you're setting yourself up. So as an example, the thing that me and Carl were talking about before was a shadow-based archetype, or it was like a shadow-based prestige class. And we were like, this is pretty niche and like you never get to use this. And then we kind of discussed how, well, you can really set yourself up to be able to use these kind of cool things, whether this is combat or in exploration or in role-playing, which are my kind of 3 main pillars when I look at things, how I break them down. You can kind of create those situations that can then capitalize on those things. So this is not really maybe the most specific to what we're talking about, but I still kind of think it's tangential, at least like when I think about rewarding player, getting myself excited, it's often these underlooked abilities. And then same with backstory, like saying like, hey, I have this part of my backstory. Would this apply? And maybe give an example of what I might apply, like getting creative with things that you haven't explored before and kind of giving the game master that. It's like, again, it's always going back to the yes and, right? Or just kind of passing the ball back and forth. But sometimes, like we talk about, the game master has a lot on their plate. They're not just handling the story. They're also doing all of the, mechanics of the NPCs and setting up the maps and all this stuff. So when you as a player can kind of provide almost like inspiration back to them, because based on your own player, your mechanics or whatever, it can actually help the GM like think of new things or think of a different spin to a situation. I think one of the reasons me and Carl like Savage Worlds so much is that there is a lot of that, and like especially with something like dramatic tasks, there's a lot of creative selling of skills, why they might apply for a certain situation. Going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, when I critically failed that, I was really trying to use different skills every time to have a creative solution to this thing. And one of them was using my powers of summoning creatures to almost be like, I forget what it's called, but when like a spaceship fires off a ship, or like a plane fires off a gaff, or chaff, I guess. Like using these summoned creatures as chaff.
Oh, God.
So I had the cargo bay open, and that's what I was doing, and that created this horrible yes, exactly. This created this horrible situation, which got me into trouble. But what
kind of animals? Are we talking pandas or squirrels?
No, these were like it was a armband that was a fictional role playing game, like, but you could create like full NPCs. So these were like his weird versions. I had like, instead of an owl bear, it was a dog cat bear, because that was kind of some of the play. Yeah, some weird creepy creatures. Anyways,
weird out there.
This was a little bit long winded, but I just wanted to kind of touch on that, and then
So in my mind, motivating. This is about motivating yourself, right? If you're playing, so
Yes.
how do you motivate yourself to get the most out of the game? And it's an interesting. If I asked most of my players and said, "Why do you play these role playing games?" They would say, "For fun." Like that would be the main reason, and I imagine they would say, by and large, everyone would have their first response. But having a little bit more understanding about what it is you're actually trying to get out of each game, I think is a really good starting point as a player. When I played my 3-year-long campaign of Dungeons and Dragons, I was pretty clear with the Dungeon Master. I said, I run 5-6 games a week. I just want a game where I can hit things and not think too hard. And so for my Dungeon Master, he was like, okay, I think we can do that. So the other players were all about the lore and the role play and everything like that. I was very much about rolling the dice and getting into fun combat and just letting off a little bit of steam. And when he knew that that's what I was after, every second session I had a ridiculous combat that was just out of this world crazy, and he knew that he was filling my cup in some ways just by doing that kind of stuff. So having a little bit of a moment where you get an understanding about what it is that makes you tick, and no two games are the same. You might say, actually, next game I'm really after a more role playing challenge, and I want to be doing more role play stuff, or I really do want to see if I can make this bard paladin multi-class work in an optimized way. It might change each time, but having a good understanding as a player about what it is that floats your boat, I think, is an important thing.
And I think you hit it right on the head. When I put in the notes self-motivation, it's people sometimes do not really be honest with themselves. It's like, you're playing the game to have fun. What is your fun?
Yep.
And if you're not getting it, then you need to not suffer in silence, and you need to have those conversations, and the stars and wishes and all that sort of things. But you got to just think to yourself, don't try to say, well, it's a role-playing game, so I should be a great role player and do this. And it's like, no, if you just want to bash stuff and take their stuff, it's fine. That's your fun. Just own it, right? That's what you want to do, and that's what's going to be fun for you. And don't feel pressured that you're supposed to be doing something else. You should be another different type of player just because, that's what people expect or whatever, or that's what you're expecting of yourself. Just own what you think is exciting. Like for me, I get excited when I get an opportunity to do like push the envelope of my character. That's why when I play when we were in the game with Eric and I was doing multi-actions all the time. And in Savage Worlds, multi-actions give you a penalty whenever you do it. It doesn't matter. This person's going to do these 2 things and they want to do them and and I don't care. My motivation was just to try this stuff out and I was honest, I'm going to fail. So if I really wanted to succeed all the time and that was what motivated me, well, then I wasn't going to have a good time thinking that that's what I needed to do. So, so really that's a great thing that players can do now. Any other thoughts on that before I talk?
Another tip.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have another tip. And this is more for players, and you might not always have a game master who's going to be this game master that James is talking about, who's not going to always, try to be aware of all the things that everybody wants to get out of the game and kind of just does their own thing. And so in general, I mean, this is just something that I do. Whenever I make a character, I always, because I like being engaged, and I don't have, not that I have to be like engaged with every scene. Of course, what I might struggle with it sometimes, I want people to have the spotlight, and I like getting, involved with other people's stories. But at least when I'm making a character, I always want to have something I can do in combat and something that I can do out of combat. Like I want to have my niche out of combat, and I want to have my niche in combat. And having a character that has those things means that no matter what the game master's doing, because they might not, play to you what you want to play, you'll always have, or most of the time, you'll have something that you can do or contribute based on your character. You can be engaged in some way. So I think there's almost some foresight there of like making a more well-rounded character, I guess, unless you're James and you're like, I just want to be, bam, bam, stupid guy. And your game master listens to you, you know that he will, and he'll take care of you. But you don't have that chance, especially now with all the people that are out there. There's never been more game masters, and you're playing online. You don't know these people, right? You don't know them in real life. So it's hard, and they might not listen to you. So that's just something that I'll say is just have some foresight and having a flexible character so you can hit those, 2 out of 3 pillars of play, right? You can have something to contribute at least 2 out of 3. Yeah.
Great. Yeah,
does that make sense? Sorry.
Absolutely,
okay,
absolutely. And if you do come across one of those games masters, send them immediately to Mastering the RPG, and we can give them advice on how to motivate their damn players.
So speaking of game masters, so we talk a lot about how game masters can motivate, how players can motivate themselves. Now, what about the poor game master? How can players help be part of the motivation? Because let's be honest, we said that, right? Game mastering is a tough job. There's ways of making it easier, but I read Reddit, the D&D forums all the time, and I don't know how many times I read something where the game master's saying it's not fun for me anymore, or I'm burned out, or I'm just not it's not enjoyable. And part of it's because the players are XYZ, So what should a player do to, other than, level up your character before you come to the session? Okay, besides that, what other kind of things can a player do to help motivate the game master? What do you think, James?
Oh God, it's a long list of. These are my stars and wishes, aren't they? As a guy who runs games all the time. Exactly. That's right. Well, I think there's a reason why 1 in 8 players are a games master. So that's why there aren't as many games. Like that's why games just don't form, because they can't find a games master. There's 2 main things for me. First one is be nice and thank your game master a lot. You need to thank them. And often that's all, it can be a very thankless job because people forget to do it. Thanks for the game. That was awesome. And I really liked this bit is a really good way to end a session. To thank your games master and give them a highlight about the things that they liked so that at least there's an understanding from this side of the chair about what it is that's working for you. The second one for me is the lean in. It is the yes and. It's the excited lean in to the story that you're being offered, I think is the important thing. There is nothing better than players that will actively support the story that you're saying. And for me, that's the number one motivation. If you can just be playing the game and leaning into it as hard as you can, that's enough to motivate me.
Even if the plot hook's a little wonky, and it maybe, I mean, come on, go for it. Be that fish and just grab that hook and I find that as a game master, when I'm a player, I'm hearing the game masters like, I feel like they want us to do a thing. You know what? I'm going to go do that thing and see what happens, because I get the feeling that's what they want. So, yep, for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely what I was going to say. Obviously, buy into what they're selling. I mean, you don't always have to do that, right? I mean, if your character it's just totally against what they're doing, but you can still find workarounds often. But yeah, I mean, you can often tell the GM really wants this or is excited about something. I mean, that's the thing, is like they might be excited about something or excited about a character. Here's one thing I've definitely seen, and that is let the GM, like if they have a character that they want to show off or, is going to start monologuing, don't just, shoot them right away. Let the GM have their, like, you can often tell when the GM is like, I'm so excited to have this, like, funny villain that's going to monologue. Like, don't just shoot them in the face right away. Unless you really know the GM and they think it was funny, they put effort into it and they want to have fun too, right? So I think it's also just kind of like slowing down, maybe paying attention. If you're seeing, like, I feel like I've been in a lot of games and I think I have a good, I'm not trying to honk my own horn here, but I think I have a good ability to be empathetic. I have a good, like, emotional awareness. And so I've seen in games, like I can usually tell. I've been in a lot of different games and I can tell when a GM is burning out. Like, I don't know how many times I've seen it and I've asked other players and like, no. And then inevitably that person is kind of getting burned out. It's, as a player, you could almost like message them, hey, are you feeling burned out? It's something that I could be doing different. Like, again, it's that communication, right? Because we all want to have the game to be fun. And I think it's the thing that I know so much. If the game master's not having fun, you're not going to have a game. So you really have to take that to heart of like, you want the game master to have fun. So what can I do to provide the game master some fun, right? So it's kind of just getting to know what they like. Again, you don't have to do this always, but just be aware and pay attention and communicate. I mean, that was just pretty much piggybacking what you guys were saying.
Yeah, and I think that leaning in, I really appreciate when players give me an opportunity to explore something that I want to explore. I think we've talked about this previously. I'm big on, I come up with there's this concept I want to explore, like, digital dark age. What does that mean? And when my players are like, yeah, let's go explore this. We're not really sure that that's what we're doing yet because it's the start of the game. But as this stuff starts coming out and lean into it and go, yeah, I really want to work with you on that and discover this world. I was flabbergasted that our last campaign, everybody said, hey, let's go back into that world that you created and, fast forward a few years and see what happened now that as we're that felt really good that they explored that world with me, this concept, and they got something out of it.
The last thing, I guess, for me to motivate, and I've just been thinking as I go along, and a lot of it's about the energy that the players have on the table as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's being attentive, being enthusiastic. Is there nothing better than enthusiastic players that are really into what you're doing? And sometimes as a storyteller, you're carrying that enthusiasm on your own. You're trying to force that into and often it can be a hard sell. And so having players that are willing to be enthusiastic and energetic at the table, I think, is an absolute blessing.
Yeah.
So do more of that. Have more energy.
And on that, and just again, the last thing, and we've talked about this so many times, but like session 0, creating a character, like ask the GM questions. Like, get your character involved in the narrative. Get your character involved in the world. If you're not sure about something, like, ask them the questions and really understand what the game is going to be like. Like, I've had this, not with Carl or James, but I've had this with other game masters who just didn't give me that much. I'm like, and I'll have to be like, what's the elevator pitch? Almost like, what's going on? Like, you've given me so little. Like, I really want to know. And then just asking them questions. And then that might even motivate them more, like that they're not realizing that they're kind of, maybe forgetting that. But getting my character, plugged in and complements the kind of style of game that they want to run. Because you don't always know that, right? So sometimes you have to meet them halfway because they're doing all this other stuff. So making a character that kind of complements or plugs in some way. Yeah. You just have long-term benefits for keeping the game master happy and meshing well.
Here.
Awesome. Keep your game master happy. bring the snacks. Don't expect them to bring the snacks.
Yeah.
That'll be also highly
Yeah, that's
motivating.
true too. Yeah, that's true too. You buy it, yeah.
Now you can't do that online, but it's do your best you can, I guess. So,
That's right.
all right, well, great. Thanks, guys. That was a great discussion there, and thanks, Gary, for sending in an email. Appreciate that. So, thanks to everyone for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherpg.com to learn about all of our projects, what we're working on, contact us, and of course, support us so that we can keep doing this. Please email gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com if you've got a question, need some advice. Eric would love to do some adjudicating of differences of opinion in your game group. And we're also on Twitter @masteringtherpg. That's all one word. If you like the show, please help out with a positive review, subscribe to it, all that good stuff, and we would really greatly appreciate that. And so once again, this is Carl with Eric and James saying good night. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Happy gaming.